Well, we've got a seasonably cold early February afternoon here, and today finds me at Candlewood Hill. This is a wildlife area recently acquired by the state of Connecticut here in New London County, Connecticut. A lot of rock back here, a lot of boulder fields, a lot of large ledges, and even some granite quarries, but this is a pretty populated area along the coast of Connecticut, but these rockier areas were overlooked or bypassed for development because it'd be almost impossible to run utilities, septic systems, water lines through all this ledge. So creates a great habitat for a lot of different plants. And the Candlewood trees, for which the park is named after, are very common on some of the thinner soils in this park, and there's several hundred acres of them. We're kind of at the very edge of where that grove of Candlewood trees is growing. We've got a lone one here being backlit by this midwinter blue sky. Candlewood is the nickname that people gave pitch pine because the knots of those trees, if you cut a branch, you find a branch that's dead and dried out, the knots will burn for hours because of all the high resin content in the pitch pine. Well, right behind this pitch pine, we've got some black gum trees. And black gum is a pretty common tree throughout southern New England in some of the moister and wetter soils. It's often found near where the Atlantic white cedar grows. And when I was recording Atlantic white cedar a few weeks ago, I did find quite a bit of black gum growing in those same wetlands. But it's not exclusive to wetlands. Just like red maple, it can grow with its feet wet. It can also grow on thinner, drier soils. I can't say I find a lot of it on the thinner, drier soils in this area, but I recall finding a lot of it last year in the Laurel Mountains of western Pennsylvania while I was recording Cucumber Magnolia, and the bark was very similar, and I had to look at the branching pattern to tell the difference. So that's why I'm out here today. We've got a nice day with blue skies where we can look at the tops of these black gum trees and see the unique branching pattern that's not obvious in the summer and not obvious on a day where it's cloudy and the branches blend into the gray sky. So let's pause for just a second, climb up on this ledge here and take a better look at these guys. And between the ledges and boulders and ridges of Candlewood Hill here are depressions where water either sits as a marsh or as a swamp forest, or sometimes just moist soil that only has standing water part of the year. And that's where I'm mostly finding these black gum trees in this particular part of its natural range, either near or in areas with moist soil. We're going to take a few minutes to get some close-up looks at the bark of these trees. But I wanted to point out this guy here with the blue sky behind him because the branching pattern on these black gum trees is what gives it away in the wintertime. The bark is kind of ordinary looking on these trees. We'll get back to them in the summer and look at the foliage, and it's kind of ordinary looking too. But there aren't too many trees where most of the branches come out from the trunk or stem, upper limbs, in a pattern that's almost a 90-degree angle. So instead of being V-shaped patterns where they meet, it's almost at a 90-degree angle. And that makes it easy to identify these trees in the wintertime. Let's pause just for a second here. And just look in the other direction here. Behind this pitch pine tree, we've got a black gum tree here. Again, I can't get close enough to it to use anything except the branching. But the branching is so unique, I'm very, very certain that that's exactly what I'm looking at here. Is this black gum tree here with branches that come out in a 90-degree fashion from the trunk. And that sure makes it easier for these birds to make their nest, because for every black gum tree I see, I often see a bird's nest at the top. Not all of them have it, but a lot of them do. And more than more than you would expect in one particular species of tree. So they're interesting trees. They get spectacular autumn colors, and they're easy to tell in the fall from the other trees by the color. We're going to hike around these trails here and look at some up close. The trees we just looked at the tops of would be difficult to get to because of the wetland here and because of the mountain laurel and the high bush blueberry, but there's some growing in an easier area to access. A little further down the trail we can get a better look at the bark, the buds, and the branching. And these areas with standing water part of the time, especially after snow melt and heavy rains that occurred here a few days ago, are where we often would expect to find these black gum trees. And I'm just hiking along, and I know there's some wet soil around here, and sure enough, right over here we got another black gum tree with another bird's nest. I'm getting pretty curious if there's a special species of bird that uses these exclusively, because all these nests I'm seeing are larger than your songbird nests. They're at least a foot around. So that's a question I don't know the answer to, but it's caught my curiosity. And I'm hiking along, and this is mostly oaks through here. Chestnut oak, scarlet oak, black oak, northern red, even a little pin oak back here in a few places where it stays wet. And, you know, the branching pattern is what's giving away these black gum trees. And the bird's nest as well. I think the bird nest caught my attention. Then I looked at the branching pattern, and sure enough, it was a black gum. And then I saw the wetter soil here with this ice. So the bird nest caught my attention. And then I work backwards to branching pattern and habitat. And again, they don't have to grow with their feet wet, but in this part of the country, that's where I'm often finding them. And we're a few hundred yards away from that obviously damp soil. And like I mentioned, I've found this quite commonly on the ridge tops in western Pennsylvania. I've also found it when I was recording down at Red River Gorge, Kentucky on several occasions. And in the summertime, it was a little hard to tell apart from the sourwood and other trees that grow on those ridge tops. So our black gum is not exclusive to wet soils, but that's where I'm mostly finding it this winter in the area where I'm spending my time. Just to prove how easy it is to confuse this tree with other trees, I've got a black gum here about 8 inches around with a fairly common bark color and a fairly common bark pattern. And right next to it, right behind this mountain laurel here, is our white oak with that wood ash colored bark. So the color of the ash you'd find at a campfire or in your fireplace, but the branching pattern that I can clearly see through these mountain laurel bushes does not lend itself to a black gum. And the branching pattern of this colony of black gum trees here. And again, these guys are all close enough together. They could be actually root sprouts from one parent tree. But again, the color is very similar to that of the white oak. But as I look up, I can clearly see the branches coming out in a 90-degree fashion on most of these larger upper limbs. And I can tell you what, in general, these trees grow straight, but when they do get deformed and they have to start growing again from a snapped limb, they grow straight, as straight as possible towards the sun. Right around the corner here, we've got a nice little marsh with lots of black gum growing right along the edge that are real easy to get a better look at that branching pattern. And in many places in this part of southern and eastern New England, we have, as you just saw, extensive bedrock ledges. And the bedrock also prohibits water from draining quickly through the area, so it often ponds up in these little marshes between the bedrock ledges. So the bedrock ledges and thin soil create these wetland habitats, and there's dozens of them in the 300-acre Candlewood Hill wildlife area here in New London County, Connecticut. And surrounding this probably 10 or 15 acre marsh here has lots of high bush blueberry growing back there. If you don't mind wading through the water, I'm sure you'd have a plentiful harvest of those blueberries in the midsummer. But surrounding this marsh, and even growing out in the marsh, are plenty of black gum trees for us to get a real good look at. I brought my speed square along with me to just really drive home the idea that these branches come out at a 90-degree angle, or close to a 90-degree angle, which is very uncommon for most trees, and they all come out at that angle, not just a few. We'll grab the speed square. Let's come on over here. We've got a nice young black gum tree here, growing right on these rocks. So again, doesn't have to have wet feet. It just has, in this case, it's growing near the parent tree. And from what I've been reading, these trees grow in colonies, and just like an American beech tree, you can get root sprouts from a parent tree that goes for acres sometimes. So these trees may not have grown from seed, but from growing from the same parent tree from sprouts from the roots. There's our branch coming out at a 90-degree angle. This one here isn't 90 degrees when it first comes out, but after a few inches it is. So there's my speed square, there's my main branch, and there's the angle of the horizontal branch. So as I go around this marsh, I'm pretty much seeing black gum trees almost exclusively growing along the wetter soils on the perimeter of this marsh. The buds themselves are not terribly large. Matter of fact, they're quite small, about the size of a grain of rice. I wouldn't use them for identification because they're so small. The only thing that gives them away is they're much smaller than a lot of the buds of other trees. But I tend to use the bigger features on trees so I can identify them quickly as I'm hiking. And this tree here that's 3 inches around is just starting to get some furrows in its bark. And this guy back here, behind this mountain laurel bush, has got furrows in the bark, but as you come down, it actually starts to look like little blocks. And that's often the case with other trees, including scarlet oak, persimmon. And, this bark of these trees is not unique enough, but the branching is. We're going to take some more looks at these trees in the next few days, and look at some more groves of these trees in the next few days, and also revisit them during the growing season. And a couple days later, keeping my eyes open for black gum trees, hiking along through dry, rocky soil. This is about 20 miles from the Candlewood Hill, but very similar habitat. Thin, rocky soil, lots of chestnut oak up here. Matter of fact, it's almost entirely chestnut oak on these thin soils here. Lots of chestnut oak leaves on the ground. This is called the Upper Gravy Train mountain bike trail. New one to me. Thought I'd come check it out and keep my eyes open for black gum. Well, the crowns of all these oaks and a few maples, soft maple or red maple in the woods here, have that branching that's predictable and easy to identify. And I'm hiking along, all of a sudden here's a tree with a completely different branching pattern down in this little ravine. It also has some high bush blueberry and some wet ice there. That's snow that looks wet, but it's actually ice that's starting to melt. And that's where we would expect to find a black gum, and sure enough, the branching pattern is giving it away as we zoom in. So this tree that's being framed by these chestnut oaks, we'll zoom in on the top of it, and the branches are going sideways. It's hard to see the 90-degree branching from this far away, and the tree's been around long enough. It's kind of branched off of branches. But this is often what the tops of these larger black gum trees look like. Let's see if we can scramble down through these ledges and get a better look at the bark, because boy, this one really has some wild looking bark. It's been around a while, and instead of having ridges and furrows, it's got all kinds of blocks. And it was a scramble to get down to this black gum tree, but I'm telling you what, I'm glad I did. And yes, it is growing with its feet moist. Got plenty of high bush blueberry here and a very high water table from weeks of heavy snowfall and then several heavy rain events since then. So there's all kinds of water down here. It may not be this saturated year round, but this particular location has provided this black gum tree a chance to grow for generations. I am not going to try to core this tree to count the rings, but even if I did, we're going to look around the other side and find out that it's mostly hollow. And from what I've been reading, these black gum trees get hollow as they get older. So this thing probably goes straight for 60, 80 feet, and then all the branching's up top there. But these furrows and blocks, they call this alligator hide for a reason. Can't say I've been this close to an alligator to look at the hide, but seen many photos of them. So big blocks. These guys are 2 or 3 inches deep, every one of them, with all kinds of interesting shapes. So these larger black gum trees, if you're fortunate enough to find one, pretty cool to look at. And produce a lot of fruits in the summertime. We'll get back to the leaves and fruits when the summer gets here. But really neat to look at in the wintertime. Again, the branching gives them away. I'm hiking along, not really looking too hard for black gum, and I see that top of that tree with that horizontal branching, and I know there's a black gum, and I come right down here and sure enough find black gum habitat. And another telltale sign of a larger, older black gum is they often get hollow. This guy's got a hollow inside him. The tree itself is probably 3 feet around, and the hollow looks like it's at least 2 feet around. And I don't know who's living in there. This isn't really black bear country, but if there was a black bear looking for a place to warm up and take a slumber, this would be a good tree to do it. Raccoons, squirrels, possums would certainly enjoy this place to get out of the elements. So there's a huge black gum tree here. This is at the Patchogue State Forest, still in New London County, Connecticut here, and we'll keep our eyes open for more really interesting examples of this tree. And we'll make one last stop on our study of the black gum tree. We're still in New London County, Connecticut here. We're actually about 2 miles from where I started this video series. That park was Candlewood Hill, with some mostly unmarked and unmapped trails. And the park I'm in here, the Kopp Family Park, is run by the town of Groton, Connecticut, and it has more marked trails and mapped trails. And just as many rocks and just as many places between these ledges where the water sits for many, many months of the year and provides a moist habitat for that black gum tree. We're going to several places here where there's dozens of trees in these wetlands. So we're going to poke our way through these ledges and find those. And meanwhile, let's just take a look at something real interesting here. There's a lot of rock in this part of New England, but this one's particularly striking. This is called Monument Rock. It's about 20 feet high. You can boulder your way up it if you choose to. Sometimes the bouldering up is easier than the bouldering down. A lot easier to see your footholds and handholds on the way up. On the way down, you're partially blind. But that being said, plenty of places to learn that sport back here. Let's continue on. And between these bedrock ridges are poorly drained depressions, and it's not uncommon to find large stands of black gum in this part of New England in these poorly drained depressions, especially the areas with more acid soil and more acid water in these wetlands. Just up the hill it's all oak, but as you get down near where the soil stays moist, we've got our ridges and furrows of a black gum tree here, and another one here, and a couple more right near the bottom of it. So what these black gum trees can do is form colonies. If the habitat is correct and it's a place where other trees can't compete well, they can often form these colonies where one plant, this tree here, this tree here, these two over here, this guy right here, this one here, and three more out on this hummock here, may have all been from the same parent tree at one time. They've even got a little branch right here with our 90-degree angle. So as these trees grow in clumps and community and get tangled up with each other, they lose their straight appearance. But it's often the younger trees that have a chance to grow without much competition that can grow quite straight, like these three out here on this little hummock. So this entire wetland is dominated by black gum trees. When I find it on ridgetops in the Appalachians, the central Appalachians where I have found it, it's usually in a mixture of other trees, and I don't recall finding large colonies of it. But interesting tree. Hard to tell from the other trees by the bark alone, but the branching pattern and the fall colors do make it easy to identify at certain times of the year. We'll continue studying this black gum when it gets its leaves and gets its fruits.